Thinking only of Iso, Say Roi kneels for President Jang, who cackles with glee. Jang tuts he must abandon his son again because Say Roi is so pathetic and wonders how it feels. Say Roi agrees he feels pathetic and then turns the question on Jang. He asks if it's gratifying and admits that while Jang made his life hell, he inspired Say Roi to keep going. Thinking it a worthy fight, Say Roi devoted his whole life to following in Jang's footsteps, only to have Jang threaten him to kneel by holding his loved ones hostage. I spent over a decade of my life following in the footsteps of such a disgusting old grouch. I deeply regret wasting my life. Jang argues he got what he wanted in the end, Say Roi on his knees. But Say Roi just snatches the address of Gunwon's hideout from him. After over a decade, I got to know you, Say Roi sighs and leaves with Sungkwon. Meanwhile, Gunwon and Hee-hoon surround Iso and Gun-soo. As Gunwon advances, Iso grabs a shovel and kicks a pipe to Gun-soo. Gunwon and Hee-hoon laugh and Iso orders Gun-soo to attack on 3. She counts and on 3 bolts, yelling for Gun-soo to hold them off. The men advance and Gun-soo swings, saying Iso told him to hold out. Say Roi warns Sungkwon it'll be dangerous and says his priority is to save Iso no matter what. He doesn't expect Sungkwon to do the same and Sungkwon groans, saying Iso may be a brat but she's family. He grins that having the same goal makes for better teamwork, and Say Roi smiles back as they speed off towards Gunwon, who watches as Hee-hoon kicks the crap out of Gun-soo. Hee-hoon moves to deliver a final blow, but Gunwon stops him, pointing out they'll lose Iso. Gunwon spits Gun-soo got everything he wanted, so he should butt out. Gun-soo says he's never once gotten anything he wanted, but they must really be brothers because they always use the wrong methods. Iso runs, but the men follow in a car. She jumps off the road just in time to avoid getting run over, and Hee-hoon sends his grunts racing after her while they drive ahead. Iso makes it to the next road just as the car turns onto it. She turns to see another car coming from the opposite direction, and as soon as Say Roi recognizes her and sees the other car, he tells Sungkwon to gun it. Sungkwon presses the gas to the floor, speeding past Iso towards Hee-hoon and Gunwon. Hee-hoon swerves at the last instant, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision. Sungkwon marvels at their airbags as he and Say Roi step out unscathed. Locking eyes with Iso, Say Roi calls her, and she runs into his arms. He checks her for injuries, and she sobs that he's crazy. Gunwon laughs that they saved him time finding them, but Say Roi ignores him, instead informing Hee-hoon they called the cops, so he should go now. Sungkwon tells Iso and Say Roi he's got this, so they should run ahead. Gunwon drives after them while Sungkwon makes quick work of Hee-hoon's goons. Hee-hoon chuckles that Sungkwon used to be one of them, but Sungkwon says he's more suited towards serving tables, and the men rush each other. Say Roi struggles to run with his likely concussion, and Iso supports him, wondering why he came in his condition. It reminds Say Roi of the time they ran through Itaewon, and Iso is confused why he's bringing that up now. Say Roi cradles her face and says she's always worked hard for him and gotten hurt, and Iso questions if he's feeling all right. Rubbing his head, Say Roi confesses that she's overtaken his heart and mind, wondering if this is how she's felt all these years. I love you, Iso. I love you so much. He embraces her, and they hold each other until Gunwon catches up. As the car careens towards them, Say Roi launches a rock which shatters the windshield. Gunwon screeches to a halt, and Say Roi hands Iso his phone, telling her the cops are coming and she should run ahead. She warns him that if he dies, she'll die too, and takes off as Say Roi faces Gunwon, who takes a swing. Sungkwon holds his own against Hee-hoon and his goons, pulling off some rad moves in the process. Thinking today is the day this ends, Say Roi rams Gunwon into the car, punching him repeatedly before Gunwon regains the upper hand. He wails on Say Roi, screaming at him to die like dad. They break apart, and Say Roi asks if Gunwon feels remorse at all for the people he's hurt. Do you feel guilty when you eat livestock? Gunwon retorts, because of you livestock, I lost everything. Enraged, Say Roi charges, but Gunwon throws him down, screaming at him to die. Hee-hoon has been equally pummeled and tells Sungkwon he'd like to use the out Say Roi offered now. Sungkwon asks about his men, and Hee-hoon shrugs he'll be lucky to drag himself away. Angry, Sungkwon says he regrets working for him. A real boss takes responsibility. Iso's legs finally give out, but she's quickly found by Detective O and the police. Gunwon rolls his eyes when Say Roi stands up again. Replaying Iso's words that she'll die if he does, Say Roi swears that he'll be happy. Gunwon charges, but Say Roi throws dirt in his eyes and delivers a swift uppercut that knocks Gunwon on his back. Catching his breath, Say Roi flashes back to Iso lamenting she didn't see much point in living, thinking it a chore to work hard only to die before reaching 100. If it feels that much like a chore, Say Roi replied, just die. He said that despite a repetitive routine, you never know what tomorrow brings. Sungkwon tried to fight him, and now he's a waiter. Iso got the pub suspended only to become its manager. He'd said some days were tough or sad, but fun days sprinkled in. He admitted every day was exciting with Iso, and she smiled as she agreed that when she's with Sei-Roi her heart beats and it's fun. The cops arrive and Iso cradles Sei-Roi as he thinks, let's be happy. Sua arrives at the prosecutor's office with an envelope, and soon after a team arrives to clear out Jangga. Sua hands over her evidence of all of President Jang's misdeeds, and the news reports that he'll be questioned. Waking up in the hospital, Sei-Roi immediately pulls Iso into a hug. Jang's assistant reports Sua was the whistleblower and the pub owners want compensation. Gun-soo adds they're on the brink of bankruptcy and the board wants to sell. Jang balks that selling now would be a loss, and Gun-soo says one firm offered a reasonable price. When Ho-jin visits him in prison, Gun-won only finds him vaguely familiar. Ho-jin introduces himself as financial manager for IC, before which he was financial manager for Min-young, and before that, he was Gun-won's punching bag. The whole thing between Sei-Roi and you started with me, and I get to wrap things up too. With the takeover bid out for Jangga, Ho-jin wanted to see Gun-won without his background. Gun-won trembles with rage hearing that Jang will also be arrested for corruption. Stop whining. It's done, Ho-jin says coolly. I forgive you. He sweeps out of there with a smile while Gun-won is dragged away by guards, screaming. Min-young is returning to Seoul and Detective Oh sighs that he won't see her much anymore. She says he's welcome to visit anytime he visits Seoul, but Detective Oh says he can't to Hai-won's annoyance. Just as she's about to leave, Detective Oh calls out to her, asking if he could give her a ride to Seoul, and Min-young smiles that she can squeeze in with him and Hai-won, sending her own car ahead. Leaving Jangga for the last time, Sua is stopped by Jang's assistant. He tells her no one will hire a whistleblower, and she asks why he works so hard for President Jang. I'm a salaryman, is his only answer, and Sua politely takes her leave. Upstairs, Jang tries to schmooze his way out of the takeover. Gun-soo says it's like Jang saying, the strong prey on the weak. Jangga became weak, so people are preying. Jang kicks Gun-soo out, grumbling to himself he's Jang Dae-hee. Kneeling on his hospital bed, Sei-Roi gets an earful from Iso's mom about the kidnapping. Mom demands how she can entrust Iso to him, and Sei-Roi apologizes, agreeing to take responsibility before realizing what he'd said. Iso ushers Mom out. He bids her farewell, and Mom is pleased to be addressed as Mother. While Sei-Roi tries to regain feeling in his legs, Iso chirps he promised to take care of her. She asks if he likes her, and he replies, no, I love you. Iso asks him to repeat it, and Sei-Roi mumbles it again and runs out with Iso cheerily reciprocating as she follows. Loan shark / mogul Granny gets a call from President Jang, swearing to do as she'd asked and not mess with Sei-Roi anymore. Granny corrects that he can't mess with Sei-Roi now, demanding what he wants. Jang begs Granny to help him, using their 40-year relationship and his failing health as leverage. Recalling he'd started his business to feed his family, Granny asks why he's running it now. Rather than answer, Jang says he's never made her suffer a loss. Granny sighs that they're no longer mutually beneficial, and there's someone else he should be appealing to. President Jang meets Sei-Roi outside Danbam, and Sei-Roi welcomes him, just like the first time. Sei-Roi cooks himself, and Jang eats heartily until Sei-Roi announces he's pursuing the takeover. He adds he'll put Min-young in charge and plans to change the company name. Jang asks who taught him to make the stew, and Sei-Roi says Dad. Jang admits he doesn't have money and offers to pay another way, getting up and kneeling. Unmoved, Sei-Roi asks what he's doing. Tears rolling down his face, Jang says Jangga is collapsing and wouldn't benefit Sei-Roi. This isn't just resentment, Sei-Roi points out. Jangga is a good company. Jang tries playing his health card and apologizes profusely for what happened to Dad and Sei-Roi, bending into a formal bow. Sei-Roi admits he'd always wanted to hear that, but it doesn't feel great. He pities Gun-soo and tells Jang to get up. Rubbing his head, Sei-Roi asks if Jang considers him a pushover. I'm a businessman. He points out this is a business takeover and Jang's apology means nothing, so they should do business. He and Iso leave Jang to sob on the floor. IC's bid is approved and Sei-Roi takes the podium. Checking Dad's watch, Sei-Roi tells the board members that Jangga represents Korea and the food represents Jangga. During crises, people found comfort in the delicious and affordable dish, and even though their image has been tarnished, it was the fault of an individual, not the restaurant. He vows to focus on people and trust over money and gain and prosper together. Afterwards, Sei-Roi flags down Gun-soo, having heard he resigned but still voted for Sei-Roi. Gun-soo says he wanted to see him achieve his goal and then admits he was the one who outed Hyun-hee and approached Sungkwan in order to spy on IC. Gun-soo laments that he did everything to win despite knowing that he couldn't have Iso even if he succeeded. Sei-Roi cuts off his apologies with a hand on his shoulder. It's okay, Sei-Roi smiles gently, because you're just a kiddo. Sei-Roi answers a call from Sua, and she says she didn't blow the whistle for him. She explains when Dad lent her money for college, she promised to pay him back threefold. She asks if this is enough, and Sei-Roi thanks her. Sua says she's free now, and asks if he'll cheer for her as a friend. Sei-Roi says he'll always cheer for her, and Sua asks him a favor, live happily. They hang up, and she turns back to Dad's grave and smiles. At Dambam that evening, Tony pouts while fumbling with tickets and Hyunhee offers to go with him. Sungkwan arrives and says Gun-soo called him, wondering what's up with Tony. Hyunhee explains he got dumped and Sungkwan tsks that it's not a big deal. They point out Sungkwan is single, and Tony says Sungkwan can keep the tickets. They're interrupted by a foreign couple, but Tony gets up and breezily greets them in perfect English, guiding them to a table. Sungkwan is stunned and Hyunhee reminds him learning English was the mission Se-ro-e gave Tony. Gun-soo arrives and confesses his guilt to Sungkwan and Hyunhee, who both hit him as punishment. Hyunhee asks why Gun-soo did something knowing he'd regret it, and he apologizes to her. She tells him to stick around and see Iso, but Gun-soo says he'll see her later because he's still a kiddo. He runs into Iso anyway, and he explains he wanted to apologize to Hyunhee and Sungkwan before heading to the States. Iso points out an apology won't cut it and walks off, but Gun-soo calls her back to ask for a handshake. Iso asks if that's the end of his crush and Gun-soo starts to agree he doesn't deserve it, but Iso pulls him in for a hug. Of course you do, Iso says and tears prick Gun-soo's eyes. You didn't even care about right and wrong. You were just faithful to me. Despite not being able to accept, Iso says she felt it and apologizes for taking advantage of his feelings. She thanks him and tells him to take care. Dragging Hyunhee along on a mission to spy on a popular restaurant, the women are surprised to find it belongs to Suwa thanks to an investment from Hong Suk-cheon, and she offers to buy them tea and tell them whatever they like. Iso snottily declares she and Se-ro-e are dating, but her cheeky smile falls when Suwa genuinely says she's glad that it's Iso. Embarrassed, Iso stalks off and Hyunhee races after her as Suwa goes in to find a young man, cameo by Park Bo-gum, interviewing for the chef position, and she's taken aback by his resemblance to Se-ro-e. She tries to play it cool but hires him immediately upon tasting his food to Suk-cheon's glee. Hyunhee meets Sungkwan at the theater, and he says he got free tickets but doesn't want to watch the movie alone. Hyunhee isn't fooled but plays along, and they skip into the movies together. Meanwhile, Iso and Se-ro-e go on a date in Itaewon, and after a playful photo shoot, she pouts that he said he loved her but wouldn't hold her hand. Se-ro-e admits it's awkward and taking his hands. Iso laughs that for all their differences, neither knows the warmth of people. She says that when he told her his story, she'd wanted to embrace his past and keep him from suffering or being lonely. Iso wanted to make his bitter nights sweet and says thinking of him, her empty life fills up. Thank you. I love you. I want to make you happy, Iso says and plants a quick kiss on his lips. Se-ro-e thinks that he'd wanted to be happy, to achieve everything he wanted without losing himself. Despite the hardships, he'd managed because of his loved ones. Pulling Iso in for a real kiss, Se-ro-e holds her close and thinks that he's already happier than he ever imagined he could be. Later, the Dambam crew sits on the rooftop drinking and celebrating while Tony plays guitar. After a shot, Se-ro-e looks thoughtfully at his glass and then Iso, taking her hand in his. Dad's words echo, "How does it taste?" And Se-ro-e just smiles. Epilogue. Se-ro-e's voiceover says that he works as usual and dates as usual. He and Iso sit together watching the sunset, and he pecks her on the cheek. Iso asks what for and Se-ro-e smiles that he just likes her. Iso pouts that he only likes her a little, and Se-ro-e plants a real kiss on her, saying that's not true. Grinning, she snuggles closer.